Welcome to the webinar that Delaware Riverkeeper Network and Berks Gas Truth are holding tonight. It's reaching out to municipalities and elected officials for a full frack ban. This is part of our mobilizing support for a complete and permanent ban throughout the Delaware River watershed on fracking and all of its related activities. We appreciate you joining our webinar tonight. We will be moving through slides, and then we will have an interactive portion at the end where people can ask questions. So please go ahead during the slides and type in any questions in the chat box that you may have, so you don't forget them at the end. Just chime in through the chat box as we go along. I'm going to begin out. My name is Tracy Carluccio. I'm Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And then partway through, I'll be introducing Karen Ferridan, founder of Berks Gas Truth. So, yes, we want a frack ban in the Delaware River watershed, but we don't want frack waste, and we don't want water pilfering. And we'll explain as we go through what that means. But before we even get started, we'd like to let everybody know that since our last webinar, the Delaware River Basin Commission did post draft natural gas regulations, and they set a public hearing and written comment schedule. The public comment period will be open until February 28th, 5 p.m. And there are 2 days of hearings. The first one is January 23rd, and that one has one session from 1 to 4:30 and one session from 6 to 9:30. It's in Waymart, Pennsylvania. In order to find out more about exactly where it is, go to the Delaware River Basin Commission website, drbc.net. The second hearing day is January 25th. Again, the first part is from 1 to 4:30, and the second one is 6 to 9:30. That one is at the Doubletree by Hilton Hotel at the Philadelphia Airport. The most restrictive aspect of these gas regulation public comment period restrictions that have been put in place is that you must sign up by December 31st on their website if you want to attend or speak at any of these hearings. Now, people from across the watershed have been complaining to the Delaware River Basin Commission that the system that they've set up is unjust, and it actually excludes people from participating in the public process. We all told this to the Delaware River Basin Commissioners at their public meeting yesterday. We filed a letter with the commissioners and the executive director of the Delaware River Basin Commission saying how we wanted this system to be changed so more people can participate. If you want more information about that, we provide it through this webinar. Also go to Delaware Riverkeeper Network's website and Berks Gas Truth website, and we'll be inputting that information in the chat box about the link of where you can go to see all the ways that the public hearing process is unfair and how we want it changed. You can sign on to a letter as an organization that we are submitting to the Delaware River Basin Commission. Sign-ons will be accepted until 5 p.m. on December 21st. We must get the public hearing and written public comment process expanded, and we feel we can do that. So, just wanted to let you know that because it's urgent, and before you know it, the holidays will be here and gone, and December 31st would have come and gone, and if people didn't sign up, they can't even speak at these hearings, much less attend them. So, moving forward with our show here tonight, I'd like to mention that there are 5 different documents that you should have received as a registrant for this webinar. The first one is talking points, and the talking points are messages that you can use when you go to a municipality or talk to an elected official about why they should support a complete frack ban and not support fracking waste and water for fracking to be allowed in the watershed. And the second item is a resolution that's a sample that can be used in Pennsylvania municipalities. It's a little bit different than the one in the other states that are in the watershed, and we'll explain why. The third item is a municipal resolution that's a sample for New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. And that resolution you should have received as well. If any of these you didn't receive, we'll be sending them out after the webinar with a link to the recording of this webinar. The fourth thing you should have received is a letter that elected officials can use as a template, as a guide, to write their own legislative letter to the Delaware River Basin Commission to tell them why they support a complete ban on fracking and all its activities in the watershed. And the fifth one is a letter that legislators can sign on to. It's a ready-made letter. All you have to do is get your legislator, state, federal, county commissioner, even a local mayor, to sign their name at the bottom of this letter. And then you send it to us here at Delaware Riverkeeper Network or to Berks Gas Truth, and we submit it to the Delaware River Basin Commission. So those are the 5 attachments or the tools that you'll be using if you move ahead with engaging elected officials and municipalities to support the frack ban. So what's going on? Well, the public has been demanding a complete and permanent ban on gas drilling and fracking and all related activities, including wastewater processing and discharges from water and water withdrawals for drilling and fracking operations throughout the entire Delaware River watershed for really more than a year now. But within the last, since really February, there has been a concerted effort on the part of many organizations to move forward with the effort to substitute for the present moratorium on drilling in the watershed a complete and permanent frack ban. So what is happening at this moment? What is the DRBC doing right now? Well, the Delaware River Basin Commission has a de facto fracking moratorium in place that is under attack by industry. When we found this out in January and February of this year, that's when we really started moving to organize fully to make sure that the moratorium wasn't lifted and instead a frack ban was put in place. The governors of the 4 states whose streams flow to the Delaware, as you all know, that's Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, are the voting members of the Delaware River Basin Commission, and they will be deciding whether to ban it for good, whether to partially ban it, and how or whether to set regulations that would allow some of fracking's related activities, such as taking frack wastewater into the watershed or allowing water to be removed from the watershed for fracking elsewhere. The Delaware River Basin Commission's next steps and our next steps are really tied to the public comment process that was started on November 30th when they posted the draft regulations. They do propose a ban on high-volume hydraulic fracturing throughout the Delaware River Basin, but they also issued draft regulations that are going to allow the storage, the processing, and the discharge of frack wastewater in the watershed, and would allow the export of water from the watershed for fracking out of the basin. It defies logic to say fracking is banned, but the toxic waste it produces and the water it depletes is acceptable. And it's also not fair for our watershed to be used to fuel fracking elsewhere. It's not fair, and it's unethical. The Delaware River Basin Commission public comment period closes on February 28, 5 p.m. Keep that in mind, because that process is in play now, beginning on November 30th, and has a limited time ahead. So, what do we know? Well, we know drilling and fracking cannot be done safely. The weight of evidence shows that fracking and its related activities pollute and gravely harm human health and the environment. Every day there seems to be another study, just most recently one that talks about low birth weight for babies that are born within close proximity, really up to 1.8 miles of fracking sites in Pennsylvania. That's just one of the recent studies that have come out in the last week. We also know that the public opposes fracking. And as I said before, it's unethical to allow the Delaware River watershed to be used to fuel fracking elsewhere, and we'll oppose it tooth and nail. To achieve a complete ban on fracking and its related activities, We need, however, to give those who support a full ban a way to express that. So we're doing that through encouraging folks to participate in the public comment process and also by the tools that we're offering through the webinar tonight. So these goals that we have for these tools and for this webinar are to engage elected representatives. It could be your municipality board of supervisors or township committee. It could be your county commissioners. To give those elected representatives really a chance to engage and to amplify the influence of local government in the decision-making process of the Delaware River Basin Commission. It's also to engage elected officials at every level, local, state, county, and even federal representatives, to give them a way to weigh in and tell the DRBC that we want a full frack ban in the Delaware River watershed. And the second very important goal of using these tools and carrying out this municipal and elected officials campaign is to educate and outreach to different constituencies. And we'll be hearing a little more about that, but it is the way that we can really reach out to people at a very grassroots residential level and let them know what's going on and engage our local officials to know what's going to happen and how it could actually affect them. So the first tool that we're going to talk about is a municipal resolution. As I said, we have one for each of the states in the Delaware River watershed, and it can be used with municipal governments, city councils, county government. It can also be used with regional agencies.
You can't advance your slide?
So the draft municipal resolution, each state is similar, except, as I said, Pennsylvania includes Article 1, Section 27, the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And just to really set the record straight on this, in Pennsylvania, we do have a special environmental rights amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution. And I'm just going to read it because I think it gives us the background and the context that we should think about as we approach Pennsylvania municipalities with this resolution. It reads, "The people have a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. As trustee of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all people." Now that means exactly what it says. It's very broad and far-reaching. And in order to exercise that amendment, we need to let our local officials know when we're going to them with this resolution that they really are incumbent through their oath of office to carry out the Pennsylvania Constitution's Environmental Rights Amendment and protect generations yet to come, as well as our generation here today, by protecting our air and our water. And a way to do that, of course, is through this frack ban resolution. So what are the first steps? Well, you register what local government you're going to approach with Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We have a database that we've made up of every local government in the entire Delaware River watershed. That's in every state. So in order to coordinate what we're doing, we want to make sure that the left hand knows what the right is doing. So if you're going to approach a municipality, please send us an email, and we're going to be typing into the chat box the address of that email. It's matthew@delawareriverkeeper.org, and you can send to that email what townships you want to approach. And Matthew will send to you the section of the database that tells you who is in a position of the Board of Supervisors in that municipality at the present time, and the contact information for that municipality. And then he will check off that you are taking on that municipality so no one else will. And then as municipalities pass resolutions, we're checking them off on a database to show that they've been done so we don't duplicate and so people don't, go to one that's been done perhaps even several months ago. We already have about 15 resolutions that have been passed, and really the only way to find that out is checking in with Matthew. So that's a very important part of this process. So moving forward now, we're going to hear from Karen Feridan. And Karen is going to talk with us on the tips that need to be used as you approach a municipality. Karen?
She's in it.
Karen, can you hear me? Karen, can you hear me?
She's dialing in again.
Okay, I think Karen might have gotten bumped off by accident, so she's dialing back in. And while she's dialing back in, I'll just say, you really need to start right away because these take time. Sometimes you have to go back to a municipality after you've been there the first time. And in order to be successful, you have to be patient enough. So start early because we want all of these resolutions to be submitted before February 28th of 2018 because that's the deadline for the end of the comment period. And also, each municipality is very different. So there's some ways to increase your success depending on what your municipality is like. And Karen, I think you're on now, and if you could now just run through some of the important tips for how to get a resolution passed in your municipality.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. I had to dial back in 3 times. Anyway, you were just getting started, it sounds like.
Yeah, your tips for getting resolutions passed.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. So one of the first things that you should do is to seek out a resident of the municipality or start with your own municipality. So if you, in other words, had volunteered to maybe take on multiple municipalities, it's really a good idea to go to the municipality with a constituent rather than just go there on your own. Regardless of how you do it, I would always recommend that the constituent be the one to contact the municipality. So if it's yours, you should do it. If you're recruiting somebody, have them call in advance and find out just how the process works. How do they want to receive the resolution? Do you need to be put on the agenda, or should you just show up and sign in at the beginning of the meeting? Sometimes they want to receive the resolution in advance so that they can send it off to the members of the supervisor board or borough council or city council before the meeting ever occurs. And it's really great when they do that because that means that they might actually have read it and have good questions about it or even be prepared to vote on it that night. So always find out. And this time of year, it's especially important to find out what their meeting schedule is because the holidays are upon us and they're, kind of tweaking their schedules a lot. So, again, if you're recruiting somebody else, a friend of yours, to be the local constituent, it's best if they'll take that extra step and make the call to set all of that up. And then you go there as the person who knows the content of the resolution or comfortable presenting it. So I covered the first 3 kind of very quickly there. But if you're comfortable working from the talking points to make the ask at the meeting, that's great. It's always best to accompany somebody again. If rather than just send them off, you should really accompany somebody you're recruiting from another municipality, especially if they're unfamiliar with this process that we're going through right now. Because I've been to a few now, and they're asking some really interesting questions. So it's kind of putting people on the spot if they're new to this to have questions kind of thrown at them that they might not have anticipated. So as the person who's sort of coordinating all of this, or if you're going to your own municipality, just tell them that you're going to figure out the answer to the question and get back to them. Now, I recommend here at the bottom of the page, make the pitch as brief as possible. again, if you have questions, or if they give you questions you can't answer, say that you're happy to get an answer before the next meeting. And then, that also opens up the channel of communication with the people in that municipality. They know you're taking it seriously and you're getting back to them with information. So it's a good thing anyhow, just to, kind of keep it on their radar that resolution has been brought to their attention. And then continuing on from there, so if you go to the meeting, you've given your presentation that you've made kind of brief, you don't want to take up a lot of their time, but you've gotten all the salient points down and they have not voted, then again, it's good to follow up even if they don't have questions. You might need to attend a second meeting or discuss it further and offer answers, to the questions that they have. If the municipality passes the resolution, make sure the secretary has an electronic version that can be cut and paste into the municipality's letterhead and then edited so that they can add the signature lines and all of that sort of thing, the date. The secretary needs to know that the DRBC needs to receive an official copy. They might ask if they need a raised seal copy. That's what they're talking about. And that's definitely what they do need at DRBC. It needs to be sent directly to them, and there are addresses in the packet you received. But they also should send a copy to Tracy, who's on the call tonight at Delaware Riverkeeper Network, so she can track all of these. And based on what she was saying at the beginning of the call, the way that they're receiving these comments, and they're only accepting them to come in online, each one of these resolutions is sort of being treated like a comment. They're all going to be entered into the docket, but they have to be done electronically as a backup. And so, Tracy really needs to receive an electronic version. That would be ideal, so that she can then send it on to the docket. So I just wanted to mention one other thing, and that is about the way that you get this thing set up in the first place. And this is why it's so critically important. I want to just sort of highlight this point. It is the holidays. Their schedules are way off. It's possible they're not even going to have their first meeting of the new year until their second meeting, that they might push back by a week, or they might just wait until the second meeting if they do meet twice in a month. And that means it might be a while before these meetings come up. But it's so worth it to ask how their process works, because sometimes they don't want you to go to the council first or the supervisor board first. Sometimes they want you to go to their environmental advisory board or environmental advisory commission, depending on what you call it where you live. So there could be some other entity that needs to actually review this first, and there's no point waiting. And so they might still have a meeting in before the end of the year, and that would just, get the process going that much more quickly. So be sure to ask things like that. I know there's one place here in Berks County where you have to go to the city council, then you go to the EAC, then you go back to the city council. So really find out, so you make it the most efficient use of your own time. And again, there might be places where if you can go straight to the EAC, you can get that done before the end of the year. I know some places around here are also talking, and some of the people I've been working with, they're going to wait for their new board to take office in January. There's one place in particular where they think it's going to be a little bit more of a friendly board, and so they're waiting. But again, that's wonderful that they're paying attention to it and they're on top of it. But if they had found out when they showed up that they needed to go to the EAC, that would have just been some wasted time. So just wanted to really stress that point, because their procedures are not consistent at all across municipalities. So be sure you know what your procedure is where you live. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions you might have about this process in the Q&A.
Thank you, Karen. Greatly appreciate that. And we will have a Q&A at the end, and you can ask Karen questions by typing them into the chat box now, and then we'll be prepared to answer them. So moving on to the next tool that you have, it's an individual sample letter, and it's for approaching elected officials really one-on-one. And then we'll talk about the sign-on legislative letter. But the individual letter is really for a legislator that you feel that you can reach out to. Now, you may not have a regular communication network with your elected legislators at the state level, but this is a good way to establish them. But if you do, it's also good because you can call and say, hey, you've heard from me before, this is an important issue, and I would like you to consider writing an individual letter to the Delaware River Basin Commission on your letterhead. And one of the things that we stress when you reach out to the legislator is you don't just email it over. You call and you say to the staff person, what's the best way for me to submit this letter for my legislator to consider writing a letter based on? And you find out, would it be a phone call? Would it be email? What is the best way to really explain why you're providing this template of a letter for your legislator to consider in writing a personal letter? The other thing that is very important to keep in mind, by the way, is this is not something you blast out on social media or send out on lists. It's really an internal tool that we use, particularly because some legislators are maybe going to go ahead and write an individual letter, and they'll use a lot of the content in this template that you're supplying them, but they don't want to look like they just copied and pasted something. They want to have, it's going to be on their letterhead, and they want to really be the author of it. So you could actually turn off a legislator by blasting it around to people. So once the staff person says, hey, the process is this, make sure to follow that process. Give due respect to that process. You're probably going to be more successful by doing that. Then you provide the sample letter and explain that it's not a cookie cutter thing. It's to be used as a guide. And as you can see, if you have the letter in front of you, as one of the tools that we mailed out, it has the basic information in there, but it really has room, and plenty of room in it, for your legislator to add something personal, to say maybe they swim in the Delaware, maybe they are kayakers, maybe they, as a family, when he was a kid, used to go down to the Milford Beach in the Delaware Water Gap, or maybe a Boy Scout camp or a Girl Scout camp, or maybe your legislator was brought up with campfire girls or Girl Scouts and was used to going out in the woods in the big forest, or even there's plenty of people in the lower part of the Delaware and down the estuary and bay that have been very active with their interaction with the river and going out, and just recreating. All those things are very sort of personal connections that a legislator might have to the river and its tributaries and its watershed, and that really makes the letter special when it's received by the Delaware River Basin Commission commissioners. It doesn't look like a cookie cutter because it isn't. They're put their own thoughts, their own feelings into it, and you should encourage that. And then the main thing you need to do after you provide that is kind of get a feeling from the staff person. How long is it going to be before they get back to me? I mean, sometimes they're in session, very busy. Other times maybe they're having meetings out in the district, and it's a good time for them to fire off a letter quickly. But just get a sense for how long it's going to be, because you might have to move that letter along. And you don't want to be a pest, but you do want to be consistent and continuing to contact the legislator if you don't get it in, say, a couple of weeks. Like, let's say they say, well, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks. In a couple of weeks, you can call. That's fine, and say, hey, do you think we might get it next week? Does they have a draft ready? Do you need any more information from me? Those kind of things to help move it along in a friendly way can really, make a busy legislator pay attention and actually write the letter. So once the letter is completed, ask them to send it to you, but it should be sent directly to the Delaware River Basin Commission, addressed to the commissioners. And we do supply the information of those commissioners, and you can get that from Matthew at DelawareRiverkeeper.org. And because it should go to their office as well as being submitted through the DRBC template, which is what we will be doing when you send us the copy. So it needs to be addressed to the commissioners and sent to the DRBC by the legislator, and then get Delaware Riverkeeper Network, myself or Matthew, our emails are on the chat box there. Send us those copies so we can submit them through the DRBC's online public comment portal. Very restrictive public comment period, and we want to make sure that each of them get submitted in both ways. And then what you should do is establish a line of communication for follow-up events. And that's because we may at some point have a press conference where every legislator that has signed a letter, would come out and say, I signed this letter because, or maybe we'll make a little video that highlights, a headshot from each of the legislators who have sent a letter, so their constituents know that they've taken a stand to protect the Delaware, and so they can stand up and say what they've done. So there's lots of things that we are planning over the coming months before the end of the comment period. So make sure you know how to get back in touch and that you do a sufficient thank you to the legislator after you get that letter. So the next tool that we have is a legislative sign-on letter. And that is a much more of a, sort of like a giant petition in a way, but it's more meaningful than that because it's a more thorough letter. It's substantial. It has information in it. It is actually a very rich document that you've received. It has many references that you can click on and do further research. It allows the legislator, if he wants to check through those references, just like the individual elected official letter does. And so it makes that document actually a very good document to use to get more detailed information at the real granular level about the facts that are stated in the legislative sign-on letter. So you should target your own state because you're going to be listened to as a constituent. So you go to your legislators and you do this, if you don't know who your legislators are, we do have that database available for all 4 watershed states, from, like I said, from the local officials, all the way up to your federal legislators. So get in touch with us if you don't know who they are. I'd be happy to share that information. Then tell us which ones you're going to be approaching. So again, we know and can coordinate what other folks are doing, and we don't duplicate or cross wires inadvertently. And again, with this, it's best to reach out in person. And for instance, have any of you ever done a lobby day at your state house? Sort of like that. If you could, get a couple people and walk around to legislators when they're in session and are around, you can hit a lot of legislators in one day by walking the state house halls and asking legislators to sign on, or dropping the letter off and coming back, later in the day. Sometimes I've done that, and it's been an effective way, giving them a chance to read it. Or send it in ahead and say, we're coming down, when you're going to be there on a Tuesday, and we'd like to get your signature. And then go by and answer any questions and see if you can actually pick the letter up with your legislator's signature on it. You can also, again, find out what their process is. Some legislators just want it emailed to them, but you need to ask the staff person first. And if they email it and they say, yeah, I'll sign on, you have them sign on and get back to you, and then you can print their letter on the bottom of the legislative sign-on letter. Sometimes there's a convention or a gathering that's going on, a meeting, some sort of meeting, and that's another good place to get signatures on the sign-on letter. Again, please keep this private as a tool. It's not to be splashed around on social media, but it's something that we all can use as an effective tool if we, talk one-on-one with our legislators and their staff to get these signatures. Once the letter is signed, even if you only have maybe 5 legislators signed on to it, or better to do 10 at a time if you can, the letter goes to the DRBC addressed to the commissioners. Again, it goes to each of the commissioners, but in order to submit it to the DRBC, it needs to be submitted through the online portal. You can do that yourself, but please make sure that you send a copy to Delaware Riverkeeper Network, because we have staff that will be submitting through the DRBC's online comment portal during the public comment period these signed legislative sign-on letters. So we have campaign follow-up on all of this, and we really need to have a report from you on the outcome for our database, for the individual letters and the sign-on letters from legislators. We, again, have a check-off box so we know who is actually signed, so they're not asked multiple times. And the other important follow-up tip is, again, keep the door open with that elected official. we may have a press conference coming up, and we would like to invite anybody, any elected official who signed a sign-on letter or an individual letter to come out and stand up and say that he's done this to protect the Delaware River watershed. We might also ask that the legislator go and speak at one of the upcoming hearings that are coming up. Very important to present public officials at these hearings as supporting their constituents in protecting the Delaware River watershed. So at this time, we'd like to be able to take questions from you folks. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to submit? We have a couple that have been put into the chat box, and we'll just begin with them. But please send any other questions that you have to Karen or myself, and we'll be happy to answer them. So one question we have here is how about letters from environmental nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy writing letters? If you mean organizations like the Nature Conservancy, sure. You can approach them with one of these letters to use for instance, either the resolution for the municipalities, which again is very rich. It has a lot of great active hyperlinks for references that they can look up the information, or perhaps with the elected official letter, if they want something that's a little more, textual and not in a resolution form, or the sign-on letter for legislators, which is very similar to that individual elected official template letter. And they can use that as a guide to write a letter. And there are organizations that will be, submitting comments through the public comment period that really maybe have not been involved in our campaign to ban fracking in the Delaware River watershed. Maybe they're groups that you support through donations or that you're members of, and reaching out to those groups, many conservation groups. This is not a priority for them, but they would take the time to write a thoughtful letter if you gave them the information. So yes, that's a very good idea, Christopher. If you want to reach out to environmental nonprofits to ask them to write letters, any of these tools would be really good to use in order to bring them up to speed on the various issues and ask them to pen a letter to the commission, and then also to file comments during the public comment period. Would also like to mention that during the public comment period, it's open right now. You can go on and submit a comment at any time. Our ban campaign, which really has a core of about 12 to 15 groups that are working hard to get everybody engaged in the public comment period the DRBC is holding, we'll be having a structured way for you to do that. We'll be engaging people weekly and then daily through suggesting comments that people can make on the nitty-gritty issues involved in the natural gas regulations that have been proposed by the DRBC, and also in supporting a full and complete ban of all activities and fracking itself within the watershed. So those opportunities are going to come up, and at any time, any of these letters that you're reaching out to nonprofits or to elected officials or municipalities with the resolutions are going to be relevant. And exercising that process is the one way we have to let the Delaware River Basin Commissioners know that the public supports a complete and thorough, comprehensive ban on fracking and all its activities in the watershed. So do we have any other questions here? I think there was a question about a moratorium, and what does that mean? Well, there is a de facto, what we call a de facto moratorium in place. In 2010, the Delaware River Basin Commissioners voted unanimously to put in place a moratorium on all drilling and fracking and all related activities, a very comprehensive moratorium that is more comprehensive and more thorough and protective than the present proposal that they have under draft gas regulations. They voted to put that moratorium in place while they developed regulations for natural gas drilling in the Delaware River watershed. The reason they did that is because there has never been any drilling in the Delaware River watershed. There's never been any gas extraction in the watershed. And because of that, they felt that they were not in a position to regulate gas drilling. And they really didn't know whether the commissioners, whether it would be consistent with the mandate that they have to protect the drinking water quality of the water supplies for 15 to 17 million people that get their water from the Delaware River watershed, and to protect the wild and scenic river, and also to honor and follow the special protection waters regulations that were already in place by 2010 that said that you cannot degrade the high water quality of the Delaware River because it is above the federal standards and is required by Delaware River Basin Commission regulations to be kept as it is if it's above minimum, and to be improved where there are problems. So the regulations require what's called an anti-degradation or non-degradation policy in the entire non-tidal Delaware River. And that's really why they put a moratorium in place. This is a very high standard. And in order for them to meet that standard, they really weren't sure how to regulate or if they could even allow natural gas drilling to occur. So they put these draft regulations out there back in 2010 and 2011. And there was a huge public outcry to the concept of even allowing fracking in the watershed or even any gas drilling. And during 2011, the public responded. 69,000 comments were put on the record. And really about 72 hours before the public meeting where the DRBC was set to approve natural gas drilling regulations that were totally inadequate and would have opened up our watershed to fracking, the meeting was canceled. And it was canceled because it was very clear that they did not have 3 votes to allow it to go ahead. As I mentioned earlier, the Delaware River Basin Commission voting members are the governors of the 4 states, and also the Army Corps of Engineers, which represents President Trump. The federal government is the 5th vote. And 2 of those votes back in 2011, the state of New York and the state of Delaware spoke through their governors and said they were not going to vote for those natural gas regulations. New Jersey was up in the air, Governor Christie at the time, and at the time Governor Corbett was of course a proponent of fracking and was expected to vote for it. But the federal government under President Obama had not made a statement. So apparently the federal government under President Obama did not want to be the swing vote. Maybe Governor Christie didn't want to be the swing vote. We don't really know that kind of inside baseball. But what I can tell you is that because the meeting was canceled, the moratorium that was put in place as a temporary moratorium until they developed rules in 2010 became a more than 7-year moratorium, because that was May of 2010. So it's almost 7.5 years now that the moratorium was in place. And in the meantime, we have learned that drilling cannot be done safely. A huge amount of scientific evidence has been developed. You see the links to that information through the PSC Healthy Energy site. There's a compendium that have been put together by scientists in New York that explain that fracking is dangerous to the environment and public health. There are now public health reports. We mentioned one earlier, but there's at least 685 scientific papers that show that fracking cannot be done safely and damages the environment and public health indelibly. And all of that evidence has mounted over the years, and that's why we feel that it's a no-brainer to adopt a full ban at this time. So that's what the de facto moratorium means. It's kind of a long answer, but maybe some people didn't know that history. And it is important context when you look at what's been proposed now, which is actually weaker than the moratorium we have in place. Karen, did you want to add to that?
Actually, I just wanted to give one pointer that somebody I went to one of the meetings with the other night did when she wrote up her talk, because she was the constituent. And so she was really careful to intersperse, or interchange, I guess I should say, the words moratorium and a temporary ban, because she wasn't sure. Very often, if you read in the newspaper, they'll talk about a moratorium on something, but they'll use the term interchangeably with ban. I mean, even when they write about what happened in the Delaware River Basin, some places said that they banned it. That's not really what they did. And so So she interchanged the terms so that they would know that what we were talking about basically was something temporary that was about to go to something permanent, and that we wanted all of the facets of the protections we already had in place to become permanent as well.
Great, thank you. And does anybody have any questions for Karen about, these steps that she went through? She successfully has already gotten some resolutions, and there are, how many are you working on with your folks in the Lehigh Valley, Karen?
Yeah, we have between Berks, Lehigh Valley, which is Lehigh and Northampton County, we already have more than 20 of them signed up for. That's out of 122, so we're still looking for more volunteers. But, we have a good jump, and then some of our friends from like the Penn East site, are going to areas of Bucks and places like that. So, so we have 20 odds set up already, though, for right where we are.
Yeah, that's really great. That's the kind of effort that we need. We also have people in Bucks and Montgomery counties that are going to municipalities. There's about 8 municipalities that are being approached. In New Jersey, we have groups, local groups that are working on their municipalities. There's about 5 that are being approached now, and then we already have about 12 municipal resolutions passed. So we're really starting to build up to an impressive number of municipalities that have passed official resolutions calling for a complete ban. If we can get, a good number in each of the states, it's one of the most impressive actions as far as the Delaware River Basin commissioners are concerned. The commission really sits up and notices when a municipality speaks. For over the years in our work in advocating on various projects with the Delaware River Basin Commission, we have noticed that they notice when a municipality speaks. They notice when an elected official speaks. So these resolutions have a big effect on the Delaware River Basin Commission. And each of us are very important as individuals and individual commenters. And municipalities representing their whole constituency, going officially on the record, then carries with that resolution all the residents that live there and are speaking really in a very big way. So that's why it's such a powerful campaign to really get a good number of these resolutions passed. I mean, we definitely want to see 100 resolutions passed by the time we finish the public comment period, and it would be great to exceed that. But 100 is sort of like, that's our goal and we're going to get it. So we really need more people to engage in order to do this. And we also have people engaged in South Jersey, but we need more. And we need people to go to some of the big cities. Somebody is already approaching Trenton, for instance. But there are other cities and borough councils that really, are going to be very, very affected directly in terms of water supply and their access to clean water and recreational use of the river if fracking waste and withdrawals of water for fracking are allowed in our watershed. So we really need to tell these municipalities what's going on and let them know how they and these cities and borough councils are going to be affected directly themselves by the toxic waste that's produced by fracking and the depletion of our water for fracking being taken out of the watershed. So we would like to, I don't see any other questions here.
Hey, Tracy?
Yes.
Just one other thing that I've noticed from doing these in the past, and we're doing it out of order a little bit this time, but we've done them in the past where we got the city of Reading, for instance, to be the first one after my own municipality or something that was easy. But the city of Reading was the one that we went, kind of focused on because that's the county seat here in Berks County. And it seemed like once one of the big boys did it, so to speak, then the others were a lot easier to get because they wanted to know who else had done it. And, so if you were considering doing multiple ones and there is some sort of larger community near you, it would probably be a good idea to recruit somebody from there first and then try to impress upon everybody else you go to talk to that you've already gotten, the big city in your area. It might not be possible, but if that was sort of on your list, keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And Karen, I see there was another question put in here about information in the papers about this. And I know that because after I spoke with you earlier, Karen, I saw popped up on on Google that you had gone to the Richmond Township municipal government and asked for a resolution, and that was in the paper. That's the way that we get this in the paper, by people going to a municipality and then a reporter reporting it. That's how so the more people going out to municipalities, the more times we're going to get in the paper, and this will get a higher profile.
Well, the other thing with that is that, now I'm telling people it's in the paper, so you can write a letter to the editor about it to say how thrilled you are to hear that they're considering passing this resolution, because that's one that hasn't signed on yet, and I think it's going to be a tough sell. So, maybe we can encourage them. And the other thing is, of course, that people could call the municipality directly and say, hey, I hope you do that, because it's really important to me. I care about our water. So, it was really helpful to get that into the paper.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there was another question here, somebody from Delaware. And, there is the Delaware Sierra Club. Stephanie Herron is very involved, and she will be able to help you, Christopher, because she wants to go to certain municipalities to get resolutions. And so I will send out her email address to you. Also, we will be giving updates to everybody who has registered about what municipalities, cities have passed these resolutions, so then you can use that information. So we'll be sending out updates, and you can say, like Karen said, hey, Easton passed this resolution, and that will help you get resolutions passed in your town when they start seeing that other municipalities are doing it as well. So we're planning by some end of next week, before the holiday weekend, to send out an update that lists all the municipalities that have been done. So you can use that information when you go to your municipality. And one last question is whether or not Trout Unlimited and some of the conservation or fishing groups have been involved. Yes, to some limited degree, but again, reaching out if you're a member and using these tools that we've provided and asking them to get involved, they can would be really great. They can send a letter to the Delaware River Basin Commission supporting the full ban. They can also get in touch with Delaware Riverkeeper Network or Berks Gas Truth to work with our organizations who have a highly organized campaign to accomplish our goal of achieving a full and complete ban on fracking and all its activities in the Delaware River watershed. I'd like to say that this is just the first of a series of webinars, and this is a repeat of one that we had in November, but we felt it was important to repeat it because the rules were not posted yet at that time. Now that they've been posted, we made certain changes to our presentation, and we can share with you the urgency of getting comments in and resolutions passed because of a deadline of February 28th. But we'll be holding webinars weekly starting in January, and Thursday, January 4th, will be the next webinar that we'll be holding, and we'll be looking at issues in the Delaware River Basin Commission's draft fracking regulations in detail. So we're really going to be digging into different aspects of the regulations and presenting information on them that will help you prepare comments and discuss this with your family, friends, and fellow members and organizations, and we'll be doing that throughout January. And you'll be getting an invitation as a registrant to this webinar. Please share the information that you've learned here today, and do not hesitate to get in touch with Matthew or myself at the email addresses in the chat box, because we really do want to hear from you if you have, need more information or support in order to move forward to try to accomplish these resolutions or elected official letters. Also, I would like to point out that there is the link there where you can find the talking points to help you as you go to the municipalities or your elected officials. There are a lot of the talking points that are in the letters, but they have more information in there, really based on some of the experiences we've already had, such as when Karen has gone to some local municipalities and the questions that have come up. So we're at 7:30 now, a couple minutes from 7:30, so I think we'll be closing the webinar because I don't see any more questions. But I would like to thank Karen for participating. Thank you, Karen, so much for participating in today's webinar.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for taking this important hour out of your night and joining us. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for considering getting involved in our campaign to engage municipalities and elected officials. Thank you, and we're going to get a Frack ban, folks. We just need to work together to accomplish it. Thanks a lot now. Bye-bye.